So thanks very much for coming, but to really kick things off, I'm going to turn everything over to Yvonne Clayton to do a welcome for everybody. So thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you for coming out. This is the first in a number of public meetings we're going to have about affordable housing. And what we have been meeting, there's been a subcommittee that's been talking about what we need to do, drafting ordinances, getting the pieces in place so that we can have an overall affordable housing program for our city. So, the reason we're here tonight is to give you the information of where we are, what we've done, and where we're going. And also to get your input, give us what you see. One of the things that we really want to put on in background information is, if you look at the maps on the side, we're saying, where do you see we should have affordable housing? I mean, should it be Springwood? Should it be Asbury Avenue? Should it be Deal Lake? If you have those kinds of input, questions, answers, things that we need to know, and any other suggestions that you might have.
Before we get going on city-specific policies, I want to make sure that we all have the same strong foundation for what exactly we're talking about, meaning what exactly is affordable housing, who qualifies for it, and so forth. So let's start at the beginning. And that is quite literally, who qualifies for affordable housing? When we talk about affordable housing, at least here in New Jersey, we're talking about folks that are generally considered to be either low or moderate income. And this is all defined by the state of New Jersey, but what it really boils down to is it's about the areas, the regions, median income. So in this case, in Asbury Park's case, the median income across a 3-county region of Monmouth, Ocean, and Mercer County. And then from there, we look at the moderate and the low incomes, and those are defined as moderate income is 80% of the region's median income. Low income is defined as 50% of the area's median income. And it applies to households of all shapes and sizes, including families of 1 parent and 1 kid, all the way up to 2-parent families with 6 or 7 children. But it also applies to senior citizens and also individuals with special needs. If you're just 2 people, a couple, or perhaps a single parent and a single child, the maximum income is about $60,000. And if you're a family of 4, no matter what the makeup of that family, whether it's 1 parent and 3 kids or 2 parents and 2 kids, the maximum income is about $75,000. So as you can see, as the family size goes up, so does the allowable income. But ultimately, in most cases, we're looking at a maximum income to qualify for a moderate income unit of about $75,000. That's a 4-person family. And while we talk a lot about the households, the families that might qualify for affordable housing, it's also about what the units might cost. What is it that actually makes that unit affordable? And it is quite literally the sales price of the house if it's for sale, or the rental price of the unit if it's for rent. And so when we think about rental units being reserved or restricted for affordable housing, we're really looking at prices at about $1,100 or less. And it's $1,100 for a moderate income unit, and it goes down as we look at a moderate income 3-bedroom unit, and it goes down in monthly rent as we go to lower income, such as a low income, and also corresponds to the number of bedrooms. So a 1-bedroom low income unit is obviously going to have a significantly lower rent than a 3-bedroom moderate income unit. And in New Jersey, when we plan for affordable housing, it is a requirement that we plan for, frankly, not just large, moderate income families, but we plan for the whole range of households that might be in need of affordable housing. So it includes planning for the single person in a studio bedroom all the way up to the family with multiple children that meets the moderate income levels. And so when we move forward with Asbury Park's plan, we're going to be thinking about all of these different households and how they can be provided housing here in Asbury Park to make it a more diverse community. So I want to go into a little bit of the history for affordable housing here in New Jersey. I could talk a long time about this, but I will try to move quickly. The bottom line is this began back in 1975 here in New Jersey with a Supreme Court decision called the Mount Laurel decision, and that decision really kicked off a whole body of case law, cases that extend all the way through today that define how it is that municipalities must think about affordable housing and how they must take action in order to promote or to create affordable housing. So in 1975, our courts determined that municipalities may not exclude low-income families from their communities through zoning. In 1983, the Supreme Court in Mount Laurel 2 got a bit more specific, and they said not only may you not just simply exclude them via your zoning, but you must actually proactively plan for them. You must meet a number of units, and you must take steps in order to ensure the creation of those units, to ensure that there's an opportunity for those units to be created in the community. Created a lot of chaos as municipalities sought to try to figure out how to do that. Ultimately, the legislature responded, and we had a Fair Housing Act in 1985, and our state legislators at that point set forth legislation that created the Council on Affordable Housing and also set forth some guidance as to how that Council on Affordable Housing would calculate municipal affordable housing obligations. And it also set forth some guidance for COA to move forward and to set forth rules for municipalities to follow in order to meet that affordable housing obligation. COA was created in 1986. They issued numbers, they issued rules. It worked pretty well. And at the end of the day, what happened was municipalities got their number from the Council on Affordable Housing. COA calculated each and every municipality's affordable housing obligation, released those numbers, and also gave guidance on how towns could comply. It worked reasonably well. It was far from perfect, but it got the job done, frankly. In 1999, things started to go a bit awry. The Council on Affordable Housing, basically from 1999 through 2015, very much struggled in order to do those two things, calculate a number and adopt rules. They tried twice, and they were both overturned by the courts. They tried again and just missed it. They had a vote, they tied, and the new rules didn't pass. What all of that means to municipalities, including towns like Asbury Park and all up and down the state, is that if you want to have a compliant affordable housing plan, if you want to meet the number of affordable housing units that our Mount Laurel doctrine says that towns should plan for, you have to do so through the courts. So in the old days, we used to see COA's numbers and the rules. We, as in towns, would adopt a plan, submit it to the state agency, and they would put their stamp of approval on it, perhaps with some amendments. Nowadays, it's gotten much more complicated since 2015, as we have to work through the courts in a more costly and complicated process. But at the end of the day, the goal remains the same: to calculate the municipal obligation and to satisfy it in a way that is compliant with the Fair Housing Act and with the Mount Laurel Doctrine generally. So let me boil down a little bit about the obligation as it relates to not only towns across New Jersey, but also Asbury Park. So every municipality in the state, with some exceptions, which Asbury Park is sort of one, has three components of affordable housing obligation. The first one is the rehabilitation obligation, and that is a number calculated based on census and American Community Survey data that indicates the number of existing households in a community that are A, occupied by low and moderate income households, and B, substandard or deficient, meaning that they need a building system upgrade, like a new roof, new kitchen facilities, new plumbing facilities, and so forth. That number for Asbury Park has not been fully determined yet, but we do have a general idea of what it is, because we've had a few experts and a few courts weigh in on what that number is. And for Asbury Park, it generally ranges between 287 units and 418 units. So it's relatively high, but it's by no means the highest rehabilitation obligation throughout the state. And that's typically met through municipalities conducting rehabilitation programs, working with the county rehabilitation program to offer the program to either owner-occupied units or renter-occupied units as an opportunity to seek a loan or a grant to rehabilitate the unit, meaning bring it up to code to fix that plumbing or roofing problem that they have, but then as a result, deed restrict the unit for a period of 10 years. Deed restrict it to low and moderate income households, meaning that should that unit be sold in the future and during that 10 years time period or be rented to a new household, that new household must be income qualified as either that low or moderate income. The other two components for each town for their affordable housing obligation is referred to as the prior round number, or the prior round obligation, and the third round obligation. That prior round obligation refers to the number of new affordable housing units that must be created in the town, and it reflects that time period when COA, our Council on Affordable Housing, was functioning pretty well from 1987 through 1999. The third round obligation represents that third round period that COA really struggled, to say the least, where I said they had rules overturned, they deadlocked, and that began in 1999, extends through today. But our third round is a 10-year period beginning in 2015 through 2025. And so our third round is actually very long, lasting from 1999 all the way through 2025. And the reason for that extended time period has to do with a lot of the chaos in the courts, which I'm happy to talk about, but I will do my best not to bore folks with. At the end of the day, for Asbury Park, the prior round and the third round obligation is actually 0 units, right? And that is because of a provision in COA's rules that states that qualifying urban aid municipalities are not required to have an affordable housing obligation. Doesn't mean that you can't create affordable housing, which is why we're all here this evening, but it means that you don't have a specific new construction number that you must meet in order to be compliant with the Mount Laurel Doctrine. I'll say generally the qualifying urban aid municipality criteria has to do with the level of existing low mod income housing deficiency, meaning a greater proportion of low and moderate income households as compared to the region. And it also has to do with population densities in excess of 10,000 persons per square mile, as well as a vacancy measure as well. And so when we look at Asbury Park, you guys are qualified because of your proportion of low and moderate income households, as well as your density in town. And so while you have this fairly substantial rehabilitation obligation, you don't actually have a new construction obligation. But as I said, it certainly doesn't preclude a town from trying to diversify and to making sure that your new housing in the future includes not only market rate, but also low and moderate income households. It just simply takes some of the pressure off with having to meet a specific number. And so when we talk about meeting this number, ultimately, or planning for affordable housing, I should say, ultimately what this means is it's going to be put together in a housing element and fair share plan. And that is the policy document that will be adopted by the planning board and ultimately endorsed by the governing body. And so a housing plan it's a master plan element. It's just like, it goes through the same adoption process as the re-examination report that we did in 2017. And it's the same type of master plan element as a land use element or a circulation element. It's simply another piece of the comprehensive master plan. And it includes a variety of topics, as I've tried to generally outline here. But it talks about what are the existing conditions in the city? What are the existing housing conditions? Who lives here? What's the population? Where do they work? What's their income? It also addresses things like what is the future availability for affordable housing naturally? What are the lands that should be considered for affordable housing? And then, of course, it talks about how it is that a town is going to satisfy its rehabilitation obligation, its prior round obligation, and its third round obligation. But in the case of Asbury Park, it's going to talk about how do we meet the rehab obligation, and what do we do to create affordable housing so as to satisfy this community, as opposed to meeting that specific number. In addition to all of this policy language, we also have to include a number of draft documents that will help with the implementation. So things like documents to help the city collect money to use for purposes of creating affordable housing, and some administrative documents, including ordinances, to make sure that affordable housing units that are created are indeed done so properly with the proper affordability controls and meet that range of incomes and families that I talked about when we first started, meaning low and moderate incomes. We're about halfway through this process of putting together the housing plan. We really got started in early January 2018. We started to kick things off. I did a lot of analysis in springtime, and so now we're here to talk to all of you and to get some input from the community as to what might be appropriate. But ultimately, we're heading towards a draft plan being completed in late summer and adoption at the planning board level in fall, in early fall, we're hoping. So that's the basic structure of the process that we're going to go through. And the next thing I'd like to talk about are some of the things that the city has already done to create affordable housing. And then we'll talk about some of the ideas that have been discussed already so that we can get some input from all of you. But one of the things that I find interesting for affordable housing as a planner that works in a lot of communities is that even though this housing plan is new to this community, the idea of providing and creating affordable housing is actually something that's been part of the fabric of Asbury Park for decades, such that when we look at what's been done by the Housing Authority, by nonprofits, and by even some other developers as well, we see more than 1,200 affordable units already have been created in Asbury Park, and that is really substantial. And that is something that in this housing plan, notwithstanding the need for additional affordable housing, it's something that we'll be able to recognize and to give the city credit for its past efforts. And just to give you an idea of where some of these are located, I just wanted to show this map briefly. But what it depicts is, while there are additional units on the west side of town, there is a pretty good representation throughout the city for affordable housing. It's not, as I see in a lot of communities, one site in this corner and one site in that corner. It's really rather spread throughout the city in a way that you don't see in a lot of other towns in New Jersey. In addition to having already created these units, there are also some projects that are underway. And I think that folks may already be familiar with them. You can actually see the Asbury Park Development Partners, which is site number 1, and the Boston Way, the Renaissance and the Boston Way project, which are under construction down the southern end of town. And so we have 4 projects coming: the Asbury Park Development Partners, the Turf Club, the Renaissance, and the Boston Way project. And so all told, we're already slated to create more than 200 housing units that are going to be affordable to low and moderate income households in Asbury Park. In addition to these existing units and these approvals, we also took the opportunity to start to think about affordable housing back in the last master plan process we went through, which was the 2017 re-examination report of the master plan. And so in there we set forth a variety of housing policies, and this is just a summary, but ultimately the planning board adopted policies supporting the creation of new inclusionary housing zones, which is one of the primary topics for discussion this evening. Also, recommendations to ensure the continued affordability of affordable housing, ensuring that your new affordable housing will meet those state requirements so that when we want credit to perhaps satisfy an obligation in the future, these units are able or eligible to do that. Also setting forth policies to convert vacant and underutilized properties for affordable housing, and that's an ongoing program, so I should say continued support for that. There was also policy support for creating regulations and policies for not just creating low and moderate income household housing, but also middle income housing. So if you recall, low income housing is 50% of the region's median, moderate income is 80% of the region's median, and middle income housing is between 80 and 120% of the median income of the region. And that was a policy that I thought was quite unique. There are a lot of towns that are perfectly happy to quite frankly do the bare minimum, to provide the minimum number of low-income houses that they need to, the bare minimum of moderate-income houses that they need to. But in Asbury Park, you guys have decided to move forward beyond simply that zero-unit obligation and to be proactive about planning for not only these more low and moderate-income households than you're required to, but also to begin to think about how you can start to bridge the gap between folks that meet the maximum moderate income limits and market rate housing. There are too many communities in New Jersey that will be built out with homes for the wealthy and homes for low income and nothing in between. And so it was unique in Asbury Park's reexamination report to lend some support to seek to create middle income housing where possible. The last policy I wanted to bring up tonight is recommendation to collect fees for the creation of affordable housing. There's a concept in New Jersey simply called development fees, where towns are able to collect development fees from developers doing work in a community, provided that work doesn't already include affordable housing, and that money can be collected for the sole purpose of funding or subsidizing affordable housing in the future. And so, as I alluded to, the emphasis tonight is on creating new inclusionary housing. I do want to touch on a couple other ideas, but the biggest thing that we need input on, the most complicated policy directive that will come out of this housing plan is how to create inclusionary housing and where it should be located. So I've used this term a lot already, inclusionary housing, and let me define it before we get any further. Very simply, it's a mix of market rate housing, meaning unrestricted housing, and affordable housing, generally referred to as low and moderate, but in Asbury Park, in some places, it might be low, moderate, and middle income housing. That set aside typically includes the affordable component of an inclusionary project typically is between 10% and 25%. Oftentimes, it's even more narrow, between 15% and 20%, but there are special circumstances on both sides of the spectrum. And as I said, it's low, moderate, and middle income, potentially. The other thing that is really critical to understanding the creation of inclusionary housing is that there must be an incentive. There must be a compensatory benefit. Municipalities are not allowed to simply take existing zoning and say, now you must reserve 20% of the units as affordable housing. Quite frankly, it would make my job a whole lot easier if we could just do that, but instead there has to be a give and take when we're creating new inclusionary housing. The give meaning the incentive. It's typically in the form of a financial incentive that is expressed through zoning. So when I say that, I mean the financial incentive would be you can do additional units, and that's discussed in terms of additional density or perhaps additional building height. But there may be other relief that can serve as a financial incentive or a cost savings in exchange for the affordable housing. So it might include things like reduced parking requirements, so the developer doesn't need to provide all the parking they might otherwise have to. Instead, they'll be providing affordable housing. And there may be other forms of relief that can be discussed, but it's really site-specific and or zone-specific, depending on the circumstance and the area that we're looking at. The other type of financial incentive that can be provided is a tax abatement, but that again is site-specific and scenario-specific for the developer and also for the municipality that they're working within. So let's talk a little bit about some of these potential strategies, not just including inclusionary housing. So first and foremost, like I said, we have a rehabilitation obligation, so let's rehabilitate dilapidated units. This will not only meet that obligation, but also it's going to improve the city's housing stock as a whole, and will also, importantly, improve the lives of those residents living within the units and also the larger neighborhood. Of course, we want to work with some of the city's existing inclusionary housing policies. So we're talking a lot about tonight about what we can do in the future, but there are quite a few things that the city has already done with some of your existing zoning and existing redevelopment plans that are already incentivizing affordable housing. So we want to work with those to to improve them, to make sure that they function exactly as needed. Of course, we also want to create new inclusionary housing zones, and that's really why we're here tonight. A couple other ideas that are up for discussion are accessory apartments. That's something that's been thought about, and we're looking for some input on. Accessory apartment is a situation where a unit is, I should say, a home would create literally an accessory unit. So it would be the principal dwelling occupied by the homeowner, for example. And then a lot of folks might think of this as the mother-in-law unit. It's a garage apartment. Perhaps it's a unit carved off the back of the site. And that unit would be reserved for a low and moderate income household. And we can do that through zoning. We can also require that in order to create that accessory apartment unit, certain regulations need to be met, such as perhaps design standards, perhaps requiring that they can provide adequate parking, and so forth. Lastly, the other policy I wanted to just simply get out there is to very simply continue to encourage your existing and any future nonprofit developers to work within the city to create affordable housing, to continue to seek additional opportunities, and to come forward to seek partnership with the city. So with that, I'm going to jump into what I think is the most important part of the meeting, which is where are we thinking about inclusionary housing, and then I'd like to hear from all of you. I'm going to go through each of these areas specifically, but this is actually the same map that's located on either side of the room. And this is essentially the city zoning map with some areas highlighted in black that I'd like to discuss this evening. So the first area is, I've referred to in here as the Deal Lake R3 district. It's an existing zone that permits a variety of residential uses, including single family all the way up to multifamily housing. It permits a maximum building height of 5 stories, although if you go through this area, you can see some existing housing units that are greater than 5 stories. And so this may present an opportunity to create new zoning that would incentivize the creation of new housing. There are some opportunities that may exist in the future as property owners decide to potentially seek redevelopment, and they could utilize this zoning as a way to not only seek an alternative development on the property, but in doing so they would be required to produce a minimum set-aside of affordable housing. I'm not here tonight to talk to you exactly what that set-aside is. It's something that needs to be calibrated to the density. So as we talk about that compensatory benefit and talk about the need to provide some sort of a financial incentive, for example, if it's and I'm going to use outlandish examples on purpose, but if the density we're going to go, or the building heights we're going to go up to 100 stories, we could require a very large affordable housing set aside, perhaps 35%, something along those lines. But if we're going to, increase the permitted building height by a handful of stories, well, then in that case, we're looking at a more typical set aside of 15, 20%, somewhere in there. The next topic, or the next area, is the Central Business District. And so this is, of course, along Cookman and Madison, right in the heart of the downtown. This is an area that's, as I imagine a lot of folks already know, occupied by a variety of mixed-use buildings. It's got a lot of commercial, restaurants, and also some residential there. Maximum building heights are set at between 45 and 70 feet. One of the things that makes it challenging in this area is that, quite frankly, it's loved. It's loved with the existing character that it has. And so one of the things that we're thinking about is, well, what other ways can we create affordable housing? Maybe this is not the location to think about 20 stories, 30 stories. Maybe there are other incentives we should think about, such as perhaps reducing parking strategies, and perhaps there are opportunities for a modest height increase. Next, I want to talk about the business and neighborhood commercial districts. And so the business districts are shown on this map in red in the area highlighted along Memorial, and the neighborhood commercial is shown in purple along Asbury Avenue. In our master plan reexamination report, outside of affordable housing recommendations, we made several recommendations to modernize the land uses and to improve the area. So, for example, We recommended eliminating the restriction that only 4 residential units can be located on any property. We also recommended modest increases to building heights, and we also recommended an upgrade or a modernization of the existing permitted uses. And that's very helpful to this process because you have existing policies that are directing some of the ways that we can incentivize the creation of affordable housing. And so through this housing plan, the recommendation is to simply build upon those ideas for the NC and the B business district in order to find ways to integrate not only more housing in these areas, but also a mix of income, so market, low, and moderate income housing within these 2 areas. We also have the Springwood Avenue redevelopment area, and this is actually an entirely different situation than everything else. Thus far, I've talked to you about ways that we can we can newly require affordable housing and in ways that we might need to give to developers in order to incentivize that creation. But your Springwood Avenue redevelopment plan was actually crafted in the 2000s, and it reflected COA's rules in place at the time. And so it requires a set-aside of affordable housing when residential units are built and a set-aside for affordable housing when non-residential space is built. So for example, if you build an office, you would have to actually provide affordable housing. Since then, the rules that that redevelopment plan is based upon have actually been overturned by the courts. That's very advantageous here because that means that we can simply eliminate that non-residential standard in the redevelopment plan because, quite frankly, it's inconsistent with state law at this time. But it still allows us to create affordable housing, and we can do so. We can eliminate that requirement while maintaining a typical affordable housing set-aside of 20%, and we can do so, we can eliminate it, and it will not only correct a concern with your redevelopment plan, but it can also be used as a spur for new redevelopment as you're actually removing one of the barriers, one of the costs for construction in this redevelopment area. So by eliminating that non-residential affordable housing set-aside, we can actually achieve better planning, and we can perhaps achieve additional affordable housing by reducing the costs of redevelopment in this area. And the last area I wanted to address is the municipal building site. This is a site that is going to be redeveloped, and so because it's municipally owned, the municipality has the power to set forth the standards for affordable housing as well as everything else as it sees fit. And this is a great opportunity for us to simply put the affordable housing requirement right there in the requirements that will be created for this redevelopment, so that the compensatory benefit will be automatically built into this initial redevelopment plan rather than something that we have to come and address in the future, as is the case in these other areas. So with that, that's the about half a dozen or so areas that we've talked about thus far, but as I said initially, this is really why the meeting's been called this evening, to hear from all of you as to whether you like these ideas, whether you don't, whether you have alternative ideas, and what they might be, with the intent that we can take this feedback from all of you and incorporate that into the draft housing plan, and incorporate it into how we're thinking about building these policies for the city's future diversity, increasing diversity. So with that, I would like to open things up for comments and questions from the public.
Felicia Simmons, Sewell Avenue, Asbury Park. Lifetime resident of the area. Speak loud. I'm natural. Okay. I seen that it mentioned in there, I'm going to paraphrase, that there was 1,200 units created throughout the nonprofits and different entities of the city. But since 2002 to 2017, there have been over 4,000 market rate units that's been created, right? So that still leaves close to 3,000, little under 2,700 that's been taken off the rolls. Those were past affordable apartments that have been now beautiful condos. So that's also pushed and marginalized residents who live here who can't afford. We've seen an influx of families leaving. to throw in. Thank you. Also, because of the creation of the market rate values of units through the city, we've seen the destabilization of the area. To continue to go on further, also looking, some of those entities that I've seen up there that were paid by Asbury Partners, Interfaith Neighbors, the Boston Way and Renaissance, weren't necessarily the cities. And the city had personally received close to $10 million over the last 20 years to create affordable or low-income housing, which we haven't created one. The city, not the housing authority, not the not Interfaith, not Asbury Partners or as AP Partners now, or those things. We haven't created anything in the city per se.
I'm sorry, the city's taken in millions and not created any affordable housing?
Not created any affordable housing, but they have rehabbed a couple houses, they have rehab houses.
Okay.
Saying that you said between 225 to 400 units where we're obligated through COA. We've only done maybe 100 or so, maybe close to 200 now if the new units coming in. So that still leaves over the last 20 years. So that still leaves over 200 rehab houses. That means houses where RCA money goes in to kind of zhuzh up or build. But replacing some of the 3,000 units that were, or 4,000 units that went off the market, the city hasn't addressed. And also, if we're going to talk about the new developments, those are what you call mixed income housing. Mixed income housing are low income housing, medium income housing, affordable housing, and market rate. So what used to be affordable 20 years ago when they said that we didn't need anything is no longer affordable. 20 years ago when they said that we meet our obligation, we already have enough low income housing, we had all these different developments at the time which we do not have right now. So even though technically court-wise we do not have to at this moment, we can all see that they're not here, right? They're not standing. And the new things that are going to come up as the new development next after they finish the Boston Way, the housing authority, again, not the city, the housing authority is moving over to the Lincoln Village, which the Lincoln Village is low income housing, but it's going to go to mixed income housing. That means out of a percentage of 100 or so units that they're going to put off a rate, there's only going to be maybe 80, or I'm being, very liberal, 80 that are going to be low income. So that's again another displacement of families. We've looked, and then some of the low income or median income, that's another question I wanted to ask. You put the maximum, but what's the minimum? Because you can be too poor to qualify for low income and median income or affordable. So in that case, how do we address that? Because that's the issue here.
Okay, so a couple things. I hear your concern about the loss of affordable housing. I mean, it's quite literally true. And not only that, the city, I understand your point about the loss of restricted affordable housing, but what the rise in income or the rise in home values throughout the city, you've lost de facto affordable housing.
Yeah.
And I just want to reiterate that's part of the reason why we're here tonight, because there's a recognition that I've seen back from 2016, now perhaps before then, but my involvement began in 2016, from city officials that this is a problem, that the city is losing, frankly, what helped make it great places to live. That it included people of all walks of life to create a true community. And so, but through this inclusionary zoning work, the goal is to really to try to help, not in like a literal location, but try to help replace some of this affordable housing so that the heart of the city that included people from all walks of life is not lost. But your question about what's the minimum, so you're right, when we talk about affordable housing, technically there's no minimum in the income guidelines, but at the end of the day, in practical reality, there is a minimum because through the type of affordable housing that I plan for when I talk about satisfying an obligation, it means that folks are required to meet the rents being offered by the affordable housing developer. And so that developer may be required to make the project work, bring in $500 a month for that one-bedroom unit or $700 a month for that two-bedroom unit, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about low and moderate income housing, it typically results in there needs to be a minimum income in order to qualify for that unit, because while you have to meet the maximum income limits, you also have to be found to be able to pay the rent. So what that requires is that a full comprehensive strategy for a municipality should look at not only these low and moderate income housing, but also looking at homeless housing and other types of housing, such as housing for folks with special needs, which also suffer from inability to meet the minimum income requirements to pay the rent of an affordable unit. And so in this plan, we're going to seek to look at a variety of housing options. I'm focused tonight on inclusionary housing because it's the biggest planning issue, quite frankly, because we're talking not just about the need for affordable housing, but also zoning. So in this plan, we'll look at not only our typical low, moderate, and perhaps middle income housing, but we'll also look at how can we better work with our existing nonprofits to create that very low income housing, which will partly answer your question because the maximum income is so much lower. And as a detail that I didn't get into, we're required to provide 13% of our units as very low income housing. So that will start to chip away at your concern. But there are other ways that we can do it, in part through working with group home providers to ensure there's housing for that population, but also working with some of the existing nonprofits in the city and for potentially new ones as well that are interested in helping to bridge the gap between low income and perhaps nearly no income, which is going to be very low income and even a little bit below.
I say that because even though it says that $36,000 is the average income of a person in Asbury Park, that is not really truthful. It's closer to 20,000. 18 or so is the outliers of a couple millionaires that moved into town that pulled it back up. And compared to Monmouth County, we're ridiculously low. Yes. So, and I know in the master plan, we upped the 4-bedroom, the 4-family occupant to $75,000, but inside of the master plan, I didn't see any addressing to kind of lower some of the other ones. And if we can up it, then why can't we lower it? You know, just maybe something that kind of.
Well, it's really about, so when I define
the wealthiest county in Monmouth County, but yet we are considered one of the poorest cities in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So that right there addresses an issue for the residents, okay. And a big issue for the residents.
All right, I think I hear you that you want to make sure that we not only plan for the upper tiers of these income categories, but make sure that we're really looking at the whole range of who might qualify from the top of moderate income down to the bottom of very low income. Okay.
Teresa Jones. There's several issues here. First of all, piggybacking on what Ms. Simmons said, we've had maybe 400 plus units of low income and affordable units taken by eminent domain, ranging from 5th Avenue and Ocean Avenue south to the Lake Avenue border and then moving west. Too much has already been given to developers with tax abatements and other kind of foolishness. We have an increasing number of homelessness situations of working folks who are couch surfing at locations within the city of Asbury Park, born and raised in Asbury Park. That inclusionary zoning, major problems with that. Number one, Deal Lake Drive's already developed. Central business. They put more housing of the market value and plus in a short number of years when it took forever to do a little silly park over here on the west side. Now there's another high-rise going up that's miraculously being built all of a sudden, and we're still beating this horse. This horse that we're talking about is so dead, the bones have disintegrated. That business commercial route that you talked about on Memorial to Asbury Avenue, that has been a potential back location for a relocation of a firehouse. We need a fire unit. And then you have the municipal site, no residential there. The municipal complexes need additional locations to house vehicles. They need a garage. They need some expansion of the site down here on the corner of Main Street and Springwood? Because right now, we're looking at environmental injustices. The debris, junked trucks, cars, and garbage are being parked on the Railroad Plaza parking lot, taking up parking there that's to be utilized for the businesses. That was the initial point, and the train station. There's parking that has been decreased by 50% because of junk military trucks there. So this inclusionary zoning is a lot of monkey business. Right now, we've had a number of low-income housing removed in the past 20 years. The other site is the former YMCA between Sewell and Monroe on Main Street. That was a residence for individuals with efficiencies and single-room occupancies. We've had a number of rooming and boarding homes where working poor folks lived on 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue, 8th Avenue that have now been converted to high-end condos. So this thing with this, scrap it. The people that have been displaced have literally been displaced. We can't even address the amount of homelessness that's going. We have homeless families. So all this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth about zoning, when people have vision and can see that high-end, greater $1 million units, market value units are being put up overnight, but we're still beating this horse. When you go for rehab and you look at the RCA program, for some reason dollars are not available, and people have to go through triple and double loops to qualify for things as simple as paint. So we got to get to some stuff, because we're dealing with environmental injustices, we're dealing with economic injustices, we're dealing with the history of Asbury Park that has gone from bad to worse as a tale of two cities, where the percentage and the vision of racism has tripled more than 20 years and going back to 1950. We have to get this back and forth nonsense here. People keep having these town meetings, folks keep coming up, we keep talking the same thing, and I know they're sick of hearing us saying the same crap, and I've been saying it 30 years. You know what I'm saying?
I hear you.
Can I just add to that? As far as I'm concerned, this is just regentrification.
It is.
And they are, I feel like it's being done on purpose, and it's nothing we can say, like she said, town hall meetings after town hall meetings, and nothing's been done. It's just like they don't care, and it's going to be done anyway. And as far as the $10 million that was given to the city, are they going to be accountable for that, for not doing anything? I mean, it's just like, you know, whatever we say, nothing happens. So to me, that's an issue, almost criminal in some aspect.
So what I hear is, I hear some very immediate concerns about the need for housing for folks that are struggling to find a home and for very low incomes. And you're right, inclusionary zoning can't answer those immediate concerns, because the zoning process takes time, and then you have to have a developer, they have to get approval, then they've got to construct it. We're talking about a couple of years. So when we talk about, but I want to make a plea for the value of inclusionary housing, because development in this city and redevelopment is going to happen. And so we need to think proactively so that we don't lose opportunities.
Hold
on, just give me 1 second.
Oh my God.
So if we don't act now, this redevelopment along Memorial, along a variety of streets in the city will happen, and it will include multifamily housing. And if we don't act to put the inclusionary standards in place now, that development will happen without affordable housing. And you'll see me here in 20 years, and you guys will just have the right to beat me up, because that means that none of the housing that was developed included affordable housing. And I very much want to avoid that. So we have to think proactively about the future, but I hear your concern about needing to look at this in two ways, not only about what's happening in the future for Asbury Park, but what can we do right now to address the current concerns of the people living in the city, perhaps without adequate or any housing. And
And to let you know, I'm a former business owner here. My family owned business from the 60s up until 2011 when I sold my last liquor license. I've been sitting on this stage hearing this stuff, being for 30 years. The same story you just said now, we heard 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, all right? So at this point, this is totally cuckoo. I am also the former nurse in the Bureau of Special Services for the city of Asbury Park. I'm the one that monitored the housing, the rooming and boarding homes with DCA, code enforcement. We keep hearing this. This, at some point, has to get on a super fast track. But it has to be housing that the average person in the city of Asbury Park making between $15,000 and $30,000 a year can afford.
Right.
Okay? Because I know what my salary is. And I'm not even going to try to take the garbage out on the new high-rise over there coming up on Ocean Avenue, which is a total disgrace. And I'm going to advocate, and I'm going to be here when I'm 120. And if you around and this thing ain't working, we fighting, sister. I'm letting you know that.
Deal. All right. Thank you. Hey, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nina Sumlin, and I'm from the west side of the town. My only issue is I really have a concern when we attend a lot of these meetings in regards to what's going on or what the issues are or what the city feels that we need. How many of you actually reach out to the community and get the community involved before you start this process?
Yeah.
Because I've been to a lot of meetings in this community, from redevelopment to whatever, but a lot of times you don't have the normal people in the community sitting in on any of these committees giving you their opinion from beginning to where you are right now, and you want to bring everybody in after you've already done
Whatever
Your
you want
plan
to do.
what
talking
you've done
about
since
fall of
January till now.
2018, yeah.
Now it's time to reach out to the community and say, hey, we need your help. Where were we at when you were starting this process?
So the only thing I'm going to say to that is this process is an interactive process, and this isn't done. So while we had one meeting with, I think, the coalition, the Housing Coalition, which we met a couple hours with them maybe 6 weeks ago too. We did meet with the Housing Coalition that is in Asbury Park. So we got together to start this process by saying, okay, here's some thoughts that we have, and then we did this obvious public meeting. We'll do another public meeting. So I'm not sure where we're communicating this is done or that your input's not important, because it absolutely is. So if you're seeing zoning
First of all, let
here,
me tell you how I found out about this meeting. It's not publicized to people to come out and actually attend this
Right.
meeting. How I was informed was with Yvonne Clayton at another meeting from the steering committee, which I'm a part of for the Neighborhood Choice Grant, and she offered me an opportunity to come to tonight's meeting. So if I didn't get an invite from her,
so what we'll do next time, listen, I'm interested in communication, right? So putting it up on our Facebook page, or the Sun covering it, or the Asbury Park Press covering it, didn't hit you, we would be happy to send you the invite for the
Okay.
next to get
let
that
me
out.
explain something to you. Just because I'm in the community and I've been to at least 15 meetings in the last month, okay? And I'm on at least 9 different committees. Number one, I don't take the time to sit and waste my time reading Facebook to find out when a meeting is going on.
Okay.
Common sense, I've been in City Hall speaking to the city manager or the mayor for tons of events that go on in the community. My thing is there needs to be a better way of communicating what goes on within the city to the community residents, and not just a matter of, because I know a city council member, oh, you're gonna give me information and say, hey, I need you to attend the meeting.
Right.
Technically, my other issue is, if I'm not a part of the West Side Community Center or the citizens of the whole Asbury Park, you're not gonna invite me to a meeting. Why? Because I'm not known like that? Because I don't see a lot of regular residents in my community where I live at, right here on the corner of Banks and Comstock, sitting in this meeting.
Right.
If I'm not handpicked to attend the meeting, I don't come. That's not fair to the community. And
This
we're
is
talking
a
the West
public
Side.
meeting, so I'm puzzled by what you're talking
A
about.
public meeting to whom, hon?
To anyone.
Because my residents on where I live at, on the west side, don't get this information to attend these meetings. That's my point. So when you're asking for community feedback and input, then you need to be in the community asking for that information for them to get involved.
Even if you have to go door to door, send out mailers, something.
Not even that, but there's a million nonprofits in our own community why not reach out to those nonprofits and say, hey, we have a community meeting coming up, just like the Neighborhood Choice does. They'll send me information and say, can you put this in the community? We got 1 million corner stores in Asbury Park. Why can't we put flyers in the community stores letting them know for the community to come out and get involved in what's going on when you're talking about redevelopment where we live?
No, I think it's a fair point.
So my name's Derek, Minnow Bloom, I'm part of the Asbury Park Affordable Housing Coalition, and so this is kind of us, the 6 or 7 of us. So one of the things I think that's interesting, I think with city council meetings, even with voting in the city, I think only 48 to 52% of the city votes, kind of like the country. So I mean, yeah, there's definitely ways we need to figure out how to do popular democracy or just get people involved. Some people are involved because they don't think it's going to matter. So one of the things the Asbury Park Affordable Housing Coalition kind of started with the belief it's people powered. So it's also our fault that we haven't reached out with you. We did hand out maybe 500 flyers ourselves because, one, we realized city council is also not full-time. So we also ourselves got to start doing outreach and start getting people there. So definitely we should get your emails to join the coalition because we get all the info of the next meeting. So the next meeting we get people,
Okay.
but just real quick.
Here's a funny part. You just said if you had my email, you would pass the information off to me. You got 2 people sitting right there in your panel that know me personally, and they didn't even invite me.
Well, great. So now we know you.
You know me.
No, but
If you were going saying that, it's a matter of just, if I had your email, I could pass the information off. And I'm not even saying just that. My thing is too, like, the biggest problem in Asbury Park, and it's always been a problem here, is a lack of communication when there's things going on.
And not just us, but Miss Mary down the street and
Well, just-
Joe up the way.
Well, just real quick, I'm not part of the city, so you don't have to tell me.
I'm not either.
But what I'm saying is, I do see that there's a lack of communication. What I'm saying is now we're here, like join our coalition.
No.
Well,
But I'm saying there's 2 people on your
we're all
board
on
that I know.
every one of us is on 9 boards.
So-
First the thing. But either way, join our email list so that you can put the word, join our group so you could put the word out. Because to do this, if you said for 20 or 30 years it's not happening, the outreach isn't happening, maybe the city won't do the outreach, but we can do it as a popular democratic group, right? And so we have met with the city 6 weeks ago, and I have a few questions actually. But just to kind of join us so that we can create community outreach, so that we can do that, So we're definitely going to put you on, so you at least have the information. You don't have to join us, but you'll be able to just tell people and things like that. We can have a community meeting where we get the plan. And one of the things when we did meet with the city that they did say is they want us to specifically maybe find nonprofits that are willing to come and develop and find other areas that inclusionary zoning can happen. And so the question I had, because we did talk about Main Street having more, so I'm wondering why there's not there.
We're talking about sorry to interrupt, the whole city having inclusionary zoning, not specific zones. So I'm really disappointed to just see specific areas called out. Sorry.
Well, then specifically though, I remember talking about Main Street then just north of Springwood and a little bit in the orange. And then we talked about iStar, and just real quick, that purple for community members, purple there. So that's that 30-year agreement that the city council,
Gave away
15
everything
years
on.
sold the city out.
Yep.
So I guess that's that 14 years left where they could do whatever they want.
Not this council.
Not this council. But they have about 14 years to do whatever they want, and the rule is that the city can't force them to do anything, and Fair Share is kind of looking for loops with us. Is everybody? No, Eric from Fair.
Oh, yeah. We're looking to make sure Asbury Park, and we're willing to work with community members and elected officials to ensure that the ordinance is in place that you all are happy with. We work with Hoboken, we're working with Jersey City, Newark, so we're here in your corner.
Fair Share too is the organization that made the Fair Housing Plan,
Mount Laurel.
but also the 475,000 units they made the state of New Jersey required for. So, but one of the things that they can do affordable housing. Some people have said that they're interested. They've been refusing to meet with us as a popular group. But we can put pressure that maybe the city can't, but we can put pressure on them. Racial injustice, you're helping gentrification, that new monstrosity you talked about, 100 20 units with not one affordable
no one
housing.
can afford.
And I think they might give like $1 million or $2 million for affordable housing, which is insane. Because each one goes for 1.2 to 6 million.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we can organize and start putting pressure on them. I've been emailing them once a week to meet with us and they've never responded. But anyway, this is stuff that we can do, right, together. So definitely if you're interested, get our email. We'll get there. And, at the moment, we're really wanting to work with the city to see more zones. And I guess you answered the zoning question.
Yeah, but I want to just respond to two things that I heard. So you asked about Main Street. I didn't show that on the map because while it's accurate that is definitely an area that's being considered, the Main Street zoning requires a larger revamp in order to create that affordable housing. We talk about doing compensatory benefit. There's a bigger consideration for the Main Street redevelopment area. It's not just simply, can we increase the building heights and create an affordable housing set aside? It's going to require a bigger look that's going to include looking at permitted uses, building heights with and without affordable housing, and so forth. So I see that as part of the overall strategy, that the housing plan will point to something that should be addressed, but I'm concerned that the effort required is a little bit outsized for what we can accomplish in this short term. So there's that. So
I think Randy wanted to make a point.
Yeah,
Just so we can get.
When we talked
everybody
about the
gets an
whole
opportunity.
city, so I'm just really
Yeah, and so-
disappointed to see specific zones called out where you're saying, we're only gonna do it there.
Well,
Where
but
it
I
really
mean-
should be everywhere, and there's huge chunks on the east side that are nowhere even considered. And I get the ISR stuff fine, like move west of that, but you're still just creating.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when we talk about, so there are some citywide strategies that have been discussed, and I have a bigger response to your question. So we talked about the idea of doing accessory apartments, that's citywide. We talked about working with nonprofits, that's citywide, not zone specific. But also there's the concept of the city looking to create affordable housing in the future as new sites come up for development and redevelopment in ways that are outside
So
of
and all
the
of
existing
that can
zoning.
change in a couple of years, like depending on if we have a different council or whatever, these are all promises that are made, but they're not written into law that are required, that the housing is going to be built.
Well, that's correct. We have
And
to
so
do the
that's what's
policy work
concerning.
first before, we have to have a master plan in place to set forth the policy so that when the city council goes ahead and adopts land use ordinances that amend the zoning to create the affordable housing, there's a requirement that there being an underlying policy. And so the order of operations is community input, development of a housing plan, implementation of the housing plan, which is going to include but not limited to adoption of ordinances. And so that'll be the city council's role in this. To your point about whether or not things can change in the future, that's possible, quite frankly, regardless of whether we're talking about a master plan being adopted or a land use ordinance. This council could adopt affordable housing requirements citywide, and the next council could strip the zoning of it. So,
But in the meantime, if we're doing it citywide, anything new that's built over 10 units, 20% would be set aside and they'd be there for 30 years. And
but
so
then,
even if it's taken
but
away
that's the
later,
land
it's
use
there.
order. But that's the land use amendment that needs to take place. And so that's part of this this implementation
So
package
you're
is
only going
adoption.
to do it for those zones though right
No,
now?
no, I'm seeking input most importantly on these specific zones because these are the areas that the zoning is going to identify for amended land use changes. So we're talking about adding that compensatory benefit, so we're talking about giving folks in potentially these areas additional density, additional building heights, reduced parking requirements, something along those lines in order to create the affordable housing. When we talk about a citywide set-aside strategy, that is not an ordinance that says anywhere in the city may now build another 2 stories. Anywhere in any single-family home may be converted to a multifamily home as long as some or all of it is affordable housing. That citywide strategy is really crafted more specific. So when a developer comes forward and says, I'd like to buy these, and I'm just making up a scenario, I'd like to buy these 4 housing units and I'd like to tear them down and construct 20 affordable housing units. What that ordinance would do is say, if you get approval to do those 20 units, you must do 20% of those as affordable housing. But that's very different than amending the zoning to automatically permit those homes to be torn down and replaced with multifamily housing. Instead, that citywide strategy is purposefully intended to be reactive to where new opportunities come forward that can't be foreseen at this time. So it protects the city if in 3 years from now a property becomes eligible for redevelopment, something that couldn't be foreseen now. It protects the city by having an ordinance in place that says if you get approval to do that residential housing that you so dearly want, you must do affordable housing. Because without that ordinance in place, there is nothing that the city can do to prevent the construction of all market rate housing. We need to do the planning now to capture those opportunities.
One, talking with Kevin Walsh, Kevin actually stated that we can actually do an inclusionary ordinance now that basically gives it to the whole city. That we can have language that would give the council the ability, until we get this done, to strip it away if we have, say, the legal problems, which that little purple area is a real problem for me. Because so much eminent domain and property was taken from people that understandably also were low income at that time, should be actually included into this plan, which we're not talking about because there's a legal issue. But we can do this ordinance with the ordinance that you're preparing for what affordable should look like. So we need to look at making sure that we don't miss an opportunity of any sort coming up. So to let developers know when you come into town, you're gonna build 10 units. After that 10, that 20 should be there. But also, another question.
So I just want to boil down your comment, which I think I heard from you too, is you understand that this may be one strategy, but you're seeking the additional strategy of that, what is sometimes referred to as a mandatory set-aside ordinance. It says anytime this new development occurs that's not foreseen, that set-aside must be provided if they get an approval.
Exactly.
And you're seeking that to be moved forward in advance of other
Exactly.
policies. Okay, thank you. And you had one other comment or question maybe?
One other, some of these zoning areas that we're looking at, and are we actually, well, two questions. One with the Boston Way. I want to make that very clear. When you eliminate total low income and then you bring back affordable, when we say mitigate, and people don't understand that, is the fact they say we got affordable housing coming, but you just eliminated 100 units of low income, which we really need because those people are set aside. But we have to also include maybe double amount of density to improve that, so those people really can be replaced or come back. Talking about the Lincoln Village or whatever. So we don't want to get off this strategy because we're not, I don't want to say one for one, but we have to make sure we're not taking away a substantial amount of people and then coming back and saying we're increasing the metric on wealth and eliminating those people.
Right. Do you feel, I understand the concern of just to keep with Lincoln Village, for example, if the number of units there were replaced one for one, and it was an inclusionary set aside, you would lose affordable housing. If it was 100 units to start, it was 100 units to end, but only 20 of those were affordable, you would lose that 80%. So part of that, in response to that scenario, it requires that the city look at how can we create additional affordable housing in some of these sites, whether it's a higher set aside or 100%, but also what other properties can be brought into the conversation. So if there's a loss of affordable housing on this particular site, how can we make up that loss in the larger area of the neighborhood?
I'm going to add in and piggyback off of what Tracy said and what you just said. I've noticed in the master plan and also in your presentation that there's zoning heights. Certain, as you might see on the other side, that there is no such zoning heights. But in certain areas, like you had in the business area, it limited to 3 to 4 stories, right? If you look at some of the newer cities or the rehabs of older cities to newer cities like Linden and other places like that where are quite beautiful, they scale up, right? So to say that to go up 3 stories, where it won't change the character of the city to go up 5 or 6, right? It won't change the character of the city to kind of densify a bit, because that is the new projection of the new construction of, countrywide. That new look is to kind of go up because you can't go out. So in certain areas, like say in the new master plan, they rezoned
single-family occupancies over on Grand Avenue, right? And now, which used to be multiple families, right, are now only zoned to one single families. So that means if there are currently 3 families right now, if something happens like a fire, because actually on Sewell where I am, there's a burnt out house across the street. And the reason why it hasn't been rehabbed, because if it's tore down, it can only go up again to one family, and it's a multi-family dwelling because there's accessory housing in the back. So they can't rebuild that house because it is only zoned, the new zoning for 1 story, which I find not beneficial to actually the community here. Because if you start building up on places like the business areas on like Asbury Avenue and Memorial Drive, you can build up higher, right? You can also do such things over on Washington Avenue and off of Prospect and those certain areas over there, which the city is burnt out, or was that Monroe? You can do that over there and you start building high and quality, high quality areas, because right now they're rat infested, overpriced roach hotels, right, which are top dollar. When I say top dollar, I mean a 1 bedroom can go $1,400, $1,200 for pretty much falling down in a 100-year-old house. So we can kind of redo if we have a creative eye and scale up in some of our zoning. And then also, I think Michael said in the meeting, what he wanted to do at Municipal Plaza is build up high with apartments. If you can go 12, and he mentioned specifically 12 stories. If you can do that 12 stories over there, I see a look of depopulation, repopulation. Depopulating the west side and the northwest side, and then repopulating and overpopulating the east side, because the density and the height on that side is ridiculous, and they did that in minutes. I could miss a couple weeks and then come back, there's a whole new project that I've never seen before. So I'm saying over here we can use that same thing. I love home ownership, and that's beautiful. And 1 family, that's nice, but having a place generally to live is even better.
So, and I just want to tease out I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're advocating for additional building heights and densities on, I think, not just, but specifically on the west side, and not to leave the west side as a place that must remain as is.
And it makes more sense, actually profit-wise, because the price value goes up for views of the ocean. So it makes more sense that the further away from the ocean, the higher you go up. And the closer to the ocean, and environmental studies, like she said, the closer to the ocean you kind of go down, it kind of helps the wind kind of get through. But it kind of builds up and makes more sense.
Okay.
I think
I want to do a quick piggyback and correction with that. We do know in environmental studies, there's a psychology and problem that's created with high densities, which is one of the reasons why Boston Way and other housing projects have been eliminated across the country.
But high density, just low income. If they're
No.
different.
Lower heights. Right now we have a skyscraper going on here with $1 million units. The average person, if you maintain the character of an environment, Main Street, 2-3 stories, and others not above that, you have a better ambiance. And we have enough of this density. Like she said, the density is over there, but the higher income people are being gentrified out. So do not do a super increase of density. That creates a rat in a trap type of psychology.
So you're saying the opposite of Felicia?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's been proven. There's science to prove it, and architectural and other engineering factors behind it.
Can we let Linda, who's been
Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Linda.
So, first of all, I want to totally support what Tracy said before about putting in something mandatory right now, because what's going on while we're trying to make this decision, which is going to take months and months and then whatever before things start happening, prices are going up already, and people are building, and things are happening, and then you're going to have this thing go on that is not even realistic to what's in the city anymore. Okay. So, and when you're talking about doing affordable and low-income housing, you, again, as other people have said, nobody's talking about the actual large number in this community who make lower than any number you've said in here. And those people have nowhere to go. They're being kicked out of town. They're long-term city residents. It's not fair to them at all to be doing this to the people who've been here for their whole lives. Their family histories are here. Their lives are here. They work at jobs They walk to work at jobs and they walk home to nowhere. They have nowhere to go in the winter to sleep, to keep themselves warm. They make money. Every day they go to work and they can't afford to live here. There's no place for them. We have a women's hospitality network that started in this city just this year because there are women like that. Single women have nowhere to go. There's people with families have places to go. Men have places to go. Single women, working women, are on the streets because we can't afford to give them a room because you tore down all that housing in that purple area years ago. That's where people used to live, and you're not talking in all of these things about where you're replacing that. That housing that disappeared, those, whatever you want to call them, people call them single room occupancy, whatever, nobody's talking about that. Those are the people who are disappearing from this city, and nothing in any of these plans is talking about them. Where are you going to put a building where they can live? You haven't mentioned one single building in here that's going to go anywhere where those people can live. That's what I feel about it.
Exactly what she said.
Okay.
Two other things, go ahead.
Can we do, because I know you're thinking about doing an ordinance in June or July, some type, can you do that type of inclusionary zoning
For a
ordinance?
single room occupancy type housing?
Yes.
That's
Or
not a,
not just the single room, but kind of the,
Affordable
overall
efficiency
affordable,
studios.
the plan that was 10 or more units, 20%.
so, yeah, we can talk about accelerating the mandatory affordable housing ordinance, but that typical ordinance doesn't quite address some of the more recent concerns. It doesn't address the immediate need. Hold on 1 second. So I'm hearing, so there's the immediate need to create affordable housing, but I'm also hearing not only just the immediate need and we need lower income, but maybe also different housing types, because even very low income is not the type of housing that you're talking about. You're talking about single room occupancy, boarding homes, homeless housing,
No, studio
alternative types of
efficiency.
housing.
That.
What's
Yeah.
that?
Studios or efficiencies.
Oh, just small, okay, then studio efficiencies, that is addressed in the typical inclusionary housing, that mandatory set-aside ordinance. Those units are gonna be included as part of, what can be developed.
We need
That's
300
different.
right
You're
now.
talking about, you said the lowest price was like 40,000.
No, that's the highest price. I'm citing the maximum income levels, because what's necessary for folks is they don't need to prove a minimum income, they need to prove that they're below the maximum income, and they can have a lower income. So when we talk about what are the income limits, we start at the top because it's just the nature of the beast. You know, it's based on 80% or 50% or 30% of the median income. So the range is defined as the maximum. So it's not that I'm suggesting that folks below that level shouldn't or won't have housing. It's not how it's typically defined. So it's.
Is there anyone who wants to speak who hasn't had a chance
Yes.
to speak yet?
Fair share.
Fair Share Housing Center, Reverend Dobson. I'm just going to say this because I had to leave, but we are here for you all. If there's a need to get something done immediately, we can talk about that. We can draft. That's why we're here. So we can work with the community members, work with the elected officials. Again, if you need our help to get something done right away, we are here. Give us a call. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Reverend Eric Dobson, Fair Share Housing Center. Tracy has our contact information. Our presenter has our contact information. I'm gonna say it one more time. Fair Share Housing is here. You need our help to get something done immediately.